Hello and God bless you. This is Dan Gallagher and I welcome you to another edition of Failing Forward. In the previous editions we've looked at changing your attitude because as we explained, or as I explained in one of the earlier sessions, that your circumstances plus your perspective equals your experience. And your experience, whether it will be good or bad, is mostly determined not by circumstances but by your perspective. Certainly circumstances can be terrible, but if your perspective is good, then you will have a good experience. Likewise, your circumstances can be perfect, and if you have a terrible perspective, you're going to have a terrible experience. But it's that perspective, as you can see, it's that attitude which primarily determines what your experience is going to be. I believe that God is very invested in us failing forward. He tells us repeatedly through His Word about persevering, about suffering through trials, about keeping our eyes on the hope. God wants us to fail forward. So, likewise, I believe that God has been practicing failing forward from the beginning of time. He created the earth with the intention that He was going to put a man and woman there, they would replenish the earth, and things would be great. But that's not what really happened. God had a different expectation, and Adam and Eve blew it. But God failed forward and then worked and has worked throughout repeated generations to bring about His plans and purposes. No matter what momentary defeats He was handed, no matter what things came against Him, God was able to turn those things into stepping stones, ultimately into success. Through the life and death of Jesus Christ, once Jesus was dead, then God raised Him from the dead, and so on. And in the same way, we need to learn how to fail forward. In Luke chapter 11, Jesus said, "The light of the body is the eye. Therefore, when your eye is single, the whole body is full of light." In other words, what are you focusing on? If I let the light be my focus, then my whole body will be light. But when your eye is evil, the body's full of darkness. Focus is very important to having a proper attitude, and it's attitude that will determine whether our experience is good or bad. What are you looking at? Well, as we looked in a previous session how friends can influence what we look at, in this session I'd like to look at expectations. What are your expectations? I mentioned in a previous session to be able to have reality thinking. You know, when I go to the bus stop and the sign is posted and it says that the bus is supposed to come by at 3 o'clock and I'm still standing there at 3:10, what's your experience? Well, for most people, they're upset. Their expectation was the bus should be there at 3 o'clock, it's 3:10 and it's not there. So their attitude is going to be bad, their experience is going to be bad. But if a person has an expectation that, you know, buses come and go, and sometimes they're on time and sometimes they're not. And he's standing at that exact same bus stop and the bus is late, but his perspective is different, his experience will be different. I saw this happen, a few weeks ago when I was in an airport. I was traveling with my good friend Mike, and we're standing in line. I didn't have any expectations of what security was going to be like. In fact, there were probably 40, 50 people in front of me to get through the security line. Now, it helped that I had zero expectations because I had planned and gave myself plenty of time. But there was a gentleman standing behind Mike. Mike was next to me, and behind him was this gentleman, and we nicknamed him the Burning Man because this fella just sat there, crossing his arms, adjusting his hat, blowing, out his nostrils. I mean, the guy was insanely upset. He had absolutely different expectations. And I could feel the heat coming off him. I turned to Mike and I said, "How's Burning Man doing?" Because it was almost like he was being consumed with his anger. His expectations were that he should fly right through security. We're both in the exact same circumstances. He's having a different set of expectations than I am. He's burning up. I'm absolutely enjoying the company of my friend Mike, and we're moving right through the line. What are your expectations when it comes to life? I heard a man say one time, live with zero expectations. Now, you could take that wrong, and I'm not saying not to set goals and not to try and achieve. I'm definitely, I think I press myself. I tend to be a high achiever. But when it comes to other people, I try to live with zero expectations on them. Then when someone does something and it's good, I get to celebrate. I rejoice in it. But when someone does something and it doesn't turn out so good, I don't let it get to me so much because my expectations upon them are more realistic. When the good is there, I enjoy it. And when the bad is there, I don't let it influence me in a negative way. I learned this lesson a few months back when it turned out that my wife and I had to step in and play a significant role when it came to the raising of our grandchildren. There was a series of circumstances that resulted in them having to live with us full time. Now, I'm 56 years old. I've already raised my 4 daughters, and with 3 grandchildren, ages 2, 3, and 4, it threw me for a loop, let alone my wife, because that's a full-time job. I was miserable, and it was because my expectations were, at this point in my life, I shouldn't have to be dealing with this. Then one day, while I was mowing the lawn, I remember distinctly getting the thought, well, you wanted to have godly grandchildren. Who did you think was going to do this? And all of a sudden, my whole thinking just changed, and I realized, rather than living in the joy of these children and living in the moment of that and seeing myself as a good influence in their lives, I was focusing on a completely unrealistic expectation. I saw a woman once who was talking about, her son who came back from the war in Iraq or Afghanistan. She's the same age as me, and yet she's having to completely care for her son who was wounded in war. I mean, who am I to be so stuck on myself with my focus all about me that I'm missing the blessing that these children are? See, you've got to learn to have realistic expectations. Your expectations affect your attitude in many ways. I have an expectation now that if these grandchildren are with me for the next 20 years, great. And if they're not, great. But whatever it is, in this moment, I'm going to enjoy it. Check your expectations. And when you do, to a big degree, you'll be able to check your attitude. Don't expect life to look a certain way. Yes, you plan, you strive, you do your best. But, life happens when it comes at you. I don't get a lot of decision-making over all the different things that come into my life. I learn to let life flow towards me, and I accept it as it is, doing my best in those circumstances. That's a great perspective. Just let life flow and then deal with it as it hands you those things. Jesus understood the human condition. I think he was disappointed that Judas did what he did, but he understood the human condition. He placed zero expectations on these people in the sense of when they fulfilled and lived up, great. Place your expectations on God. Place your focus on Him. God will never disappoint. The psalmist in Psalm 22:5 said, "They cried to you and were saved. In you they trusted and were not disappointed." When we place our focus on God, look towards the future, put all our expectations on Him, then I'm able to live in a broken world full of sin and evil and all the other things that come along. When trains don't arrive on time and when buses aren't there or when other people don't live up to their commitments, I can take the proper perspective. I can live with good expectations and realize that I can adjust my attitude. My attitude is my choice based on the friends I have in my life, based on the expectations that I live in. Change your focus, change your attitude. Change your friends, you'll change your attitude. Change your expectations, you'll change your attitude. If you can change your attitude, you can learn to fail forward. God bless you.